Hello, hello. Can you hear me? Oh man, thank you so much for this beautiful introduction, this ceremonious way that you open the space. Before I even begin, I just want to acknowledge that justice is not inevitable and healing is not guaranteed. So the people who cultivate and create and sustain this space, can we just take a moment to express our deep gratitude for them? Like, seriously, like, what I know, I've been on the earth for a few years now, and I know that in order to facilitate healing for others, there is some deep work, some deep, invisible to the rest of us work that you have to do for yourselves. And so I'm just grateful for everyone who helps to keep this community intact, that helps to keep this as a sustained work in these times, especially because I know the invisible, psychological, emotional, and even physical labor is something that is just, we can't even imagine what it takes. So I just wanted to start with that acknowledgement. But I also wanted to acknowledge that, you know, there's like the fancy biography stuff about who I am, but I'm from Brooklyn. Like, I just like to make sure like I do some add-ons. I'm from Brooklyn, you know, New York, Brooklyn, right? So I'm just like, you know, this is who I am. We have like 12 different ways of saying you good, and it means those 12 different things, right? Like, this is me, like, you good, right? You good, right? This is a part of who I am. I'm also a person who loves Black people, like, deeply, all over the globe. And this is just some beautiful spaces that I've been able to inhabit in Bahia, Brazil, and Cape Town, South Africa, more in the last few months. And I particularly love spaces where, even though Black life is under threat, joy and wellness and authenticity and even rage and pain are nourished and sustained in the most beautiful ways, right? So that's a deep part of who I am. And I am, it was mentioned in the biography, but I'm co-directing a Center of Racial Justice and Youth Engaged Research over at UMass Amherst, right? Myself and another sister, we founded the center last year, and it is something else to convene young people of color around the truths that are currently becoming illegal to engage in school spaces. It is something else to be a part of that work, of making sure that we don't confuse schooling with education, and making sure that we always have those spaces where true education is happening at all times. And so this is just some of what's nourishing me right now. And finally, I think I shared this image last year. I gotta share it again. I am the descendant of Massman Valley. That's my grandfather who built carnival costumes for Trinity Carnival, right? To participate in this tradition of liberation and Africanity, and even in the Caribbean part of the African diaspora. And I'm bringing all of this to the fore because as we have this conversation about racial healing, I've been moved over the last few months by this quote. It's really paraphrased. He didn't say it exactly like this, but this is the essence of it, by Tyrone Howard in a conference a few months ago, where he asked, how do we stop asking deficit questions so we stop creating deficit answers? This has moved me to my core, because particularly when we have conversations about race and racism and racial healing, we are so trauma focused and we get so caught up in the gruesomeness and the pain, right? And what it means to be in that we go down a deficit path. And I want us to grapple with that today, right? And so I begin with the things that are affirming me and sustaining me and bringing me joy, and complexity too, right? Because this notion of being joyous and wholesome doesn't negate the fact that there is real pain for us to contend with. I also want to acknowledge that my conversation today is not just centered on people of color in terms of content, but as my first audience as well. People of color are my first audience in this conversation. What happens, this is not a rhetorical question, what happens when we have conversations about race and racism and we center the ignorance of the white people in the room, even if it's the most innocent ignorance in the world? What happens when we do that? When we prioritize what white people need to know about race and racism? Don't be scared like that. So even when we have the goal in word of affirming people of color and dismantling racism, indeed, we end up doing the exact opposite. We perpetuate the racial harm of in the space having people of color on the margins because we are centering the priority of, in our minds, making sure that the white people in the room understand and know what so many people of color already know experientially, right? And so we're in like racism 101, which continues the erasure that we're trying to dismantle. So I want to be intentional about that. And that doesn't mean that there are not implications for everyone else, but I just want to let you know where my priorities are for today as we begin. So I'm going to kick us off with this piece. It's entitled Simon Says, as a way to just launch us into some of what we're content, like what makes these kinds of spaces necessary in the first place. Let's hope the sound is given.
The game is Simon Says. You know how it goes. When Simon says do an action, you do an action. But you're only supposed to do an action if Simon says. Ready? Simon says, raise your right hand. Simon says, put your right hand down. Simon says, raise your left hand. Put your left hand down. Oh, what does it say? Y'all look good. Okay, Simon says, put your left hand down now. Cross your arms. No. Simon didn't say cross your arms. Listen, you must not be a good listener at home. Why isn't everyone speaking now? You chose to play this game, now you're choosing not to play. How dare you ruin it for everyone else? Simon says it's still not time for a bathroom break. Stop asking. Simon says you're not listening. People that don't listen will never be successful. You know what? They don't even care. They don't. Just take out a book and shut up. Read. Simon said read. Simon says it's time to follow the hallways now. One behind the other. Straight down the line. Type to the right. Simon says if you can't be silent, how will you hear what Simon is telling you to do? Silence. I said be silent. Simon said be silent. Simon said only 20 minutes to eat your lunch and be silent. Eat faster. Eat faster. Simon said sit up straight and be still. Simon says tuck in your uniform. You don't want to tuck in your uniform? Don't sit in the corner. Simon says if you can't handle this classroom, how will you handle your jail cell? Simon says you will refer Simon from Officer Simon said know your place. Boy, only as time as you are. Officer Simon says you a listener at home. At this rate, you'll not be going. And you will speak. You are told to speak. Speak to your cellmate now. Why aren't you speaking now? You chose to play this game, now you're choosing not to play. How dare you ruin it for everyone else? Officer Simon says still not time for a bathroom break. Stop asking. Officer Simon says you're not listening. People that don't listen will never be successful. Officer Simon says it's time to follow the hallways again. One line type to the right. Officer Simon says if you can't be silent, how will you hear what Officer Simon is telling you to do? Silent. I said be silent. Officer Simon said be silent. Fix your uniform. Fix your face when you're talking to me. Clean your boat, you fucking animal. Sit up straight. I don't care if I didn't say Officer Simon said. Officer Simon said. So sit up straight and be still. Be still. Be still. Officer Simon says if you can't handle your jail cell, your casket.
So much of the work that I'm committed to is questioning, disrupting, and dismantle what it is that spaces of schooling are preparing our children for. What is it that we are complicit in? And how is that connected to the deep racial trauma that is being exacerbated even right now? Right? This is the definition of racial trauma that I shared with you all last year, the textbook definition that talks about race-based traumatic stress and what it means to live in a society where you take on persistent and unrelenting race-based traumatic stress and how that lives in your mind, body, and spirit with often zero spaces such as these to really work through, see, and think about the possibilities of healing that, right? And so I'm talking about, and I want to prioritize the fact that this race-based traumatic stress that we're talking about for today, the racial trauma that necessitates racial healing, lives in our bodies. And I'm prioritizing that not to negate anything else, but because we often don't think about that part. We think about justice work as an intellectual project or a communal project, or we think about it in terms of what it means to dismantle systems if we're really doing that good work. But to the degree that it is playing out in our bodies, The Body Keeps the Score, if you're not familiar, is a very powerful book that talks about the fact that trauma is located in the body. Right? We think about it as in the mind, we think about it as intellectual, but it encodes itself in the body. And the author said, traumatized people chronically feel unsafe inside their bodies. The past is alive in the form of gnawing interior discomfort. Their bodies are constantly bombarded by visceral warning signs, and in an attempt to control these processes, they often become expert at ignoring their gut feelings and in numbing awareness of what is played out inside. They learn to hide from themselves. So as we continue this conversation today about racial healing and racial trauma, I want us to really be mindful of how these things that might seem, we place them in the political realm, we place them in the intellectual realm, we place them in all these other realms, but I want us to also think about the way that they play out in our bodies. These are recent headlines, right? About these young people. This might seem like a victory, yes, that these children had to advocate to have themselves represented in the most fundamental way in their curriculum. Is it a victory that they have to contend with the traumatic race-based stress emerging from continuous attempted erasure and gaslighting of their identities? How does that play out in their bodies? Especially when you think about the developmental ages of our youth, of our children. And the fact that many of us have gone through this. We're reliving histories, and we've already had this encoded into our mind, bodies, and spirits, right? When we talk about this race-based traumatic stress, we're talking about the fact that it's emerging from being at constant war with the social mirror. If the aesthetic standard of beauty and acceptance is rooted in white coloniality, in white aesthetic standards, right? How does it play out in your body? When you know that the way that you have to show up in the world is not necessarily authentic to how you wake up every day. That you have to adjust and you have to fix and you have to make sure that you're not at war with that social mirror, not just for acceptance and belonging, but sometimes just to get a job. What does it do? How do we shrink ourselves, right? And it can sound, let me, before I talk about this, I just want to name something connected to that. I'm gonna come back to this stuff, I promise. It can sound really abstract, the way that we think about the way out in our body. But anybody familiar with neuroplasticity? Right? So cognitive neuroscientists have found that in another fancy word, epigenetics, right? That trauma can encode itself into our very DNA, right? And what it does when it encodes itself in our DNA is that it creates the capacity, it creates the possibility of being expressed in future generations. It's not inevitable, right? But it's there. Neuroplasticity says that our minds hardwire our reality. So if I decide that every time I feel anxious, I escape into social media, my mind will create a habit loop in order to make that an easier and more efficient process. The same way you don't wake up in the morning and have to relearn how to tie your shoelaces because your body has created a habit loop. We do this, this, and that. You probably don't remember tying your shoelaces this morning because your mind has created a habit loop. The power and possibility of knowing that is the fact that we have the power to reprogram those habit loops. But to the degree that we understand the way that these habit loops are encoded along the lines of race-based stress, then we now have an avenue for thinking about how is this living in my body? I'm going to show you towards the end of this something that I've done to really challenge how I deal with the hypervisibility of Black death and how that impacts me and my body. Like I had to become conscious of it so I could set boundaries with media because it's not healthy. I know it's not healthy for us collectively, but for me, like it really was having an impact that I had to pay attention to. And I'm just like, yo, when I'm exposed to this, like there's a habit loop forming now. What behaviors am I finding refuge in that might not be healthy for me? So this by default or design is really meant for us to think about the fact that in so many ways, what we're dealing with when we're talking about racial healing is talking about healing the social scripts that we have inherited from our families, from our DNA, from our family systems, from the institutions that we navigate, the cultural institutions that we navigate, the political institutions that we navigate. We inherit scripts about our identities. I'm racialized. So I inherit scripts about what it means to be in this Black body, particular scripts about what it means to be a Black woman. But because of the power of something like neuroplasticity, I have the power to re-script that in alignment and in congruence with my own chosen values about the power and purpose of who I am and who I want to be. And that's what I'm inviting us into today. So I'm gonna go back to these because these are important. I want us to be mindful that one of the deepest components of the scripting that we inherit that perpetuates this racial trauma is rooted in this white settler colonial logic, right? So some of the scripting of breaking home culture with school culture. We participate in it like normal, right? The huge thing about my TED Talk is that I'm like, yes, I'm articulate, but because I speak in this variety of ways and they're all equally valuable and valid, because what school attempts to do is break my home culture from my school culture so that I can internalize, I can inherit a script that says there are superior knowledge systems to the ones that have come from my home and culture. And so in spaces of education, we don't only inherit that, we become complicit in perpetuating it because that's the work, right? This attempted erasure is also a part of this white settler colonial logic that becomes so normalized. What was powerful for me in that video, the poem, is the way that they juxtapose what happens in school and what happens in prison. Like, you have 20 minutes to eat, you cannot go to the bathroom right now. Like, we've made these things normal. The parts of you that you have to negotiate that can be here authentically or not, the way that you have, let's talk about the body again. What happens to our children when they don't have the physical autonomy to go to the bathroom of their own accord? I know students who have gone to the detention because their elbows were poked out when it should have been tucked in. They're being taught that their bodies must be still and confined. And the way that that maps on to other models of carcerality and control in our society says a lot for what school is truly preparing our children for. All right, so because we understand these things, I want to be careful to assert what racial healing is not. Racial healing is not bubble baths and spa days. And I'm not even saying that to be cute, because bubble baths and spa days are lit, like, you know, like. And they have their place, because oftentimes what bubble baths and spa days do is they support us with things like grounding, is that they create space for us to regulate our nervous systems. Again, this lives in our body. Again, it's not abstract. It's not just, oh, it lives in our body somewhere. No. Our nervous systems become dysregulated when we're exposed to constant stress. And so coping with that and creating avenues for soothing our nervous systems is something that we can sometimes choose healthier behaviors for, like bubble baths and spa days, or sometimes we find ourselves finding refuge in behaviors that are destructive, because we require soothing in healthy ways, right? So why we can't just allow racial stress to just go rampant because it's playing out. So bubble baths and spa days it's not what racial healing is. It has its place in the world, but I don't want us to get confused. It's also not what Cornel West calls the illusion of inclusion. Racial healing is not accomplished because one Black or brown person made it to some office or some position that keeps the same system intact that oppresses everybody else. No, that's not what it is, right? It's also not using our cultures as a bait and switch in content and competencies deemed superior by schools. So racial healing is not, I used hip hop in the classroom so that I can, make sure that these kids learn some Shakespeare. Because I felt like I was culturally relevant. And so now equity, right? Racial healing is not, as I said earlier, centering trauma narratives or monolithic racialized perceptions. So we've seen this huge explosion of these DEI positions, which by the way, are going away now, if you ain't noticed. A lot of people losing their jobs because, right. So, but in those spaces, a lot of the work has been, well, how do we center trauma narratives so that white people can learn from them? That's often the goal. Or how do we center trauma narratives so that we can actually start to figure out how believable racism is? That's not racial healing work. It's actually more traumatic, right? All right, so I just want to be careful that we know that, because what I shared with you last year is the importance of understanding that racial healing happens on both systemic and individual sides, and it requires us to heal the wounds, the ideological wounds that shape our society, those collective norms and values, the collective norms and values that say that there are particular language practices in schools that are superior and we all buy in. How do we heal those wounds and move towards wellness? And the way that we heal the institutional practices, so not just an abstraction, like, oh, those are some ideas, we need to stop having those ideas. That's nice, but what about the institutional practices, laws, the policies that uphold that, keep them in place, right? Like the 2 young Black girls I lifted up again, I showed you last year, and countless others who were punished for having braid extensions in their hair. There's a policy in the school that says that they cannot have that cultural hairstyle. They didn't go to prom. They couldn't go to prom. They got suspended. They got detention. How do they internalize that? And how do people who did not get that punishment internalize what that means? How does that live in your bodies? How you walk with your back straight when you don't have to change your hair in order to succeed in school? And how do you shrink yourself when you do? Unless you have spaces in your life and world that are making sure to counter those kinds of messages. So this racial healing work is not just about the abstract work and the broader work of healing those kinds of that broader consciousness, but healing the way that that consciousness permeates our practices, laws, and those real concrete ways that we crystallize it into our society. And then making sure that we're healing those relationships that get legitimated, the relational dynamics that get legitimated by these institutional norms, right? So excessive force by officers is going to be a relational dynamic that's legitimated by institutional policies rooted in anti-Blackness, which is the ideological piece. It's normal. How do we heal our relationships as humanity? Because those relationships are perpetuating. I'm now an authority in the school. It's my job to make sure that you effectively engage in your cultural erasure. That's my job. To correct, right? To control. And if we don't heal those, then what? And then to the degree that what happens when we internalize that? Because this is a cycle. It all works together. So racial healing is happening across all of these areas. And what it does is it moves us when we understand that we're not asking then what's wrong with me. We're asking what's wrong with the conditions around me. Right? It pushes us to that point because it's really important that we have that reframing. Right. So now that we're talking about these scripts, what I really want, if anything, if you don't leave with anything else today from me, I want you to leave thinking about the scripts that you've inherited. What scripts did you inherit in your earliest memories around your racial and other identities that shape the way you move through the world? And how are those scripts reified by the experiences that you have in your everyday life right now? Right? And this is Bobby Harrell's Cycle of Socialization, if you're not familiar, that talks about the fact that we come in without these scripts. But then we're first socialized in our families where we get those messages. Then we move into institutions where, like our schools and our places of worship and our places of work, and all of those spaces also crystallize those messages, and then they get enforced, right? They get enforced, they get validated. So what does it mean to understand that we're a part of this cycle and that we have the neuroplasticity in order to engage in transforming it? All right, so this is something, I'm bringing this up because this is something that I showed you last year. It was like really quick. Like I was like, this is a thing, right? This is a thing that I do with my students that's so powerful and so important. And I really want us to think about it a little more deeply because I want you to be able to leave knowing that you have the tools to engage in concrete actions of healing racial trauma patterns, right? And so the way that this works with my students, I'm going to show you an activity that I've done with them recently. I work with educators, of all kinds of educators all over the nation and even internationally. And inherited from Barbara J. Love, this notion of what it means to engage in pattern transformation. So identifying a belief system and behavior rooted in white supremacy that we wish to transform. And that takes that getting real honest. So the reason the 4 I's that I just showed you are so important is because once you start to map that out, once you think about an incident that has happened in your school or in your classroom or in your experience, and you take the time to say, well, wait a minute. If I kicked this student out of my classroom, or no, better yet, if I, graded this student a little easier because I potentially had a lower expectation of who they are, how can I think about what's happening for me across these 4 eyes, right? What are the ideologies that I've inherited that's making me carry this perception? How is my institution making this normal, right? How is this playing out in my relationship with students, and what is it that I've internalized? Once you start to really sit down and do that self-work, what happens is you start to realize, oh, I'm identifying patterns that need to be transformed. And so you can identify the patterns and look at it and it's like, that's good, but how are you gonna transform it? Now that I know, I have to engage in the transformation. So now I'm lifting this up and I'm actually asking myself, when is the first time that I internalized this pattern? When is the first time I internalized the notion that if I'm in an intellectual space, I can't speak like I'm from Brooklyn? Where did I learn that? What are the messages that reinforce that? Right? And then talking about describing the pattern, when does this occur? I'm like, oh, like I code switch as soon as I'm, pick up the phone, you gotta have that conversation, you know, you're trying to get that house, switching that voice, right? So like I have this pattern of code switching, even though for me, particularly with the work that I do, I know code switching to be an act of racial violence. But I've internalized something about my survival and about what it means to reduce race-based stress if I play into white supremacy sometimes. That's just me being authentic, right? And so the next question here is, I usually experience feelings of. So when I engage in that, with the knowledge I have right now, when I find myself switching into language practices that don't feel authentic to me, I feel like an imposter. If I'm doing this every day I'm walking around feeling like an imposter, like we don't think about it because we just go, we do it, especially because we've inherited these modes of survival, right? And then again, it's gonna play out in our bodies. Don't forget, it's gonna play out in our bodies. If I'm walking around feeling like an imposter every day, of course my nervous system is gonna be dysregulated. Of course I'm gonna be a little anxious. What made it necessary for me to switch out of my identity in the first place? If something requires me, we know this in our interpersonal relationships, if you have to become someone else to be in relationship with someone, then that person is not for you. If I have to come into this job and switch out of myself to belong here, this place ain't for me. This is unhealthy behavior that we engage in all the time for our survival. And I can feel that, and we're like, oh wow, now then we call it imposter syndrome. It's like this big thing because we engage in these small acts every day, right? And then, you know, these are the other questions, the sort of things I say to myself are, how do we start rationalizing the trauma pattern? Oh, I have to do this because. The same way you might see somebody rationalize their pattern of staying in a toxic relationship. It's for a certain kind of security, financial security, same reason you're staying at your racist job, right? But we quick to be like, you need to get out of that relationship, right? So we got to think about it. Afterwards, I feel like. What do you feel like after you abandon your most authentic self in order to stay in a space longer? Like, what does it feel like? I really want us to like attune to this, because you see what the Body Keeps the Score said, we hide from us. It's so normal. I promise you, so many of us don't even think about it anymore. We're at the place where we can feel the cumulative impact. We don't even necessarily know the source because we're so often in this space. What do you feel like? I feel gross, honestly, when I can't show up as my authentic self. when we are at the helm of classrooms where we're now, because we've done it so well, teaching our children that this is what they also have to do to survive. Teaching them to abandon themselves. Teaching them to abandon their communities and their cultures and their voices to get a job, to get into a school that's not even equipped for who they are. So we're complicit, right? The white supremacist ideology shaping my pattern are, and if you've done the 4 I's prior to doing this, then you already know these are some of the ideologies that are like, why am I doing this? Like, what is the broader message that's shaping why I'm doing this? And then finally, the institutions I navigate reinforce my pattern by, we stay in patterns because we benefit from them, or at least we think we do. So there are going to be reinforcements. There are going to be little treats, as Dr. Cynthia Dillard says, right? You're going to get a cookie for playing along with white supremacy. You certainly are. At what expense? That's another story. So your institution is reinforcing this pattern in some way, shape, or form, and lifting that up. Lifting these things up is the way that we go about thinking about how to transform it, because then we come to thinking about what it means to identify a contradiction to the pattern. And this is how, again, we actualize this neuroplasticity. The possibility of neuroplasticity means that now I can identify a contradiction to the pattern because I have the power to encode that into the physical landscape of your brain. I know this sounds wild, but I'm like, whoa, it's real, right? There's like physical this is what's happening in cognitive neuroscience. They're finding out that there's thoughts are actual physical things. Like you can encode them and you can dismantle them too, right? And so you can create new patterns. You can uproot old scripts and create new patterns that contradict the old ones so that you can engage in different behaviors. And so as I get close to closing, what I want to do is show you, I know this is supposed to be like a keynote, but y'all have something to write on? Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you. Came prepared. All right. So I want to show you an activity that I've engaged with in my racial healing work with educators more recently. And it comes from the work of Stephen Covey's my white uncle, if y'all don't know. He's the author of 7 Habits. I love that book, and it's just powerful. And so I'm obsessed with the book. I'm playing it down. But in the book in particular, he lifts up something about what it means to be congruent. I believe that one of the deepest, you'll see it in my like closing points, the deepest sources of our pains is from a lack of congruence. We are not congruent with our values. We say we are one thing and we show up in the world as another thing. Again, for survival, for cookies, for paychecks, whatever, right? And that incongruence is painful. And so what this does is Stephen Covey calls it an affirmation. I call it a congruence affirmation. It gives us an opportunity to bridge our values with our actual daily habits and actions in a way that means that if I come into this space, I'm in a deeper change form. I'm in this community, lifting up powerful values of racial healing, of wholeness, of what it means to be culturally affirming. And then I'm going to work, and in my daily habits, I'm not actualizing any of that. So how do you bridge that? Like, what does it look like? All right, so we're gonna find out. So I'm actually gonna have us listen to a clip of Mr. Covey sharing how to create one of these statements. And I had you bring out something to write because I actually want you to practice. I'll show you mine and I want you to practice. All right, so let's listen.
Personal leadership is not a singular experience. It doesn't begin and end with the writing of a personal mission statement. It is rather the ongoing process of keeping your vision and values before you and aligning your life to be congruent with those most important things. And in that effort, your powerful right brain capacity can be a great help to you on a daily basis as you work to integrate your personal mission statement into your life. It's another application of begin with the end in mind. Let's go back to an example we mentioned before. Suppose I am a parent who really deeply loves my children. Suppose I identify that as one of my fundamental values in my personal mission statement. But suppose on a daily basis, I have trouble overreacting. You see, I can use my right brain power of visualization to write an affirmation that will help me become more congruent with my deeper values in my daily life. A good affirmation has 5 basic ingredients. It's personal, it's positive, it's present tense, it's visual, and it's emotional. So I might write something like this. It is deeply satisfying, that is emotional, that I, personal, respond, present tense, with wisdom, love, firmness, and self-control, positive, when my children misbehave. Then I can visualize it. I can spend a few minutes each day and totally relax my mind and body. I can think about situations in which my children might misbehave. I can visualize them in rich detail. I can feel the texture of the chair I might be sitting on, the floor under my feet, the sweater I'm wearing. I can see the dress my daughter has on, the expression on her face. The more clearly and vividly I can imagine the detail, the more deeply I will experience it. The less I will see it as a spectator. Then I can see her do something very specific which normally makes my heart pound and my temper start to flare. But instead of seeing my normal response, I see myself handle that situation with all of the love, the power, the self-control I have captured in my affirmation. I can write the program, write the script, in harmony with my values, with my personal mission statement. And if I do this day after day, my behavior will change. Instead of living out of the scripts given to me by my own parents, or by society, or by genetics, or my environment, I will be living out of the script I have written from my own self-selected value system. I have helped and encouraged my son Sean to use this affirmation process.
So let's stop there. Is that me? My echo. Let's stop there. So what Covey is saying in this clip is not that we just have affirmations that we just say and walk away. I know that that has its value in some way. But to take the time, I believe in something that I've called a vision-driven justice, right? To take the time to actually visualize viscerally what it feels like to be in that stressful situation. We're talking about race-based stress, we're translating it here. And then to think about what that re-scripting would look and feel like. The mind doesn't always know the difference between like what's actually happening and what we're visualizing, which is why visualizing is so powerful. Because the more that you practice that, the more you create the conditions to actualize it, the more you begin to solidify those patterns, right? So for me, in using this formula, I thought about, like I said earlier, oh, you can't hear me. Okay, what I said earlier, what it means to constantly be exposed to the hypervisibility of Black and brown death, right? So I wrote my congruence affirmation because I value the lives and the life of people of color, and being hyper exposed to that death is very harmful for me. So I said, it makes me feel safe, that's emotional, that I, this is personal, choose, this is present tense, to unplug and connect with beautiful people, places, and practices in my community that's positive and visual when viral videos of Black and brown death take over the media/social media. This is one of my congruent statements. Because otherwise what happens is I get sucked in and then I'm triggered and then I don't know what I'm doing instead, right? Like now I can't like I can't do my work, like I'm distracted, it's a lot. So I'd actually like you to take a moment to take a stab at this, right? So I want you to take a moment to think about, you can consider a source of race-based stress in your life, a stressor that you know needs to be transformed. You know you need to engage in this pattern transformation. And consider what it would look like to make a congruent statement that is personal, positive, present tense, visual, and emotional. So let's take a few minutes. All right. So I'm going to pause this. Obviously, this is work that you're invited to continue, ongoing work, and invited to continue, especially as you learn more and more about what your values are. I don't think we always know. We're not always attuned to our values. And they're there, but we often engage in daily acts that contradict values because those values are not something that we've unearthed. And so what does it mean to go about the work of really understanding, well, if I'm committed to X, Y, or Z in the area of racial equity and racial healing, then what does that mean? Like, how do I name my values around that to make sure that I'm showing up like that in the world, right? You might have a pattern of self-talk, right? The way that you talk to yourself when you feel like you failed. And that, if you, Black Lives Matter, and you talking to yourself like that, your own Black life, right? Like, you got to think about it, how we contradict our own values in our everyday practice. All right, so do I have any brave souls who would like to share the draft of what was coming up for them? Sure, yeah.
I feel safe, warm, and alive, living in my power and ferocity as a Black woman daily as I build a beautiful, radical community with other radiant Black women who are also feeling alive and living from their well of power and strength.
Yes, thank you. Okay. Is it on? I don't know if it's on. Mm-hmm.
I feel alive, warm, and safe, living in my power and ferocity as a Black woman daily as I build beautiful, radical community with other radiant Black women who are also feeling alive and living from their well of power and strength.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing. So I'm going to workshop this with you, right? So powerful. Here's the one thing that I want to know more about. When, what? So this is how you're going to feel, how you will feel, and what you will do, this building, when what happens. So you see in the Covey example, he said, when my children misbehaved, because he know that he like starts tripping. I made sure to say when these viral videos happen, because I know that that's the thing that triggers me. So this building that you're going to do and stand in the power of that feeling, what is the when for you?
I am feeling scarcity in my body. There is not enough for all of us.
Thank you so much. Yes. Yes. I appreciate you sharing that so much, because oftentimes, like, we might feel that in our bodies and not even know what to do with it, right? Just to be like, I feel this, and it just perpetuates itself. So to know and to name that that is an act that you're gonna make sure to engage in as a way to transform that pattern is so powerful, and thank you for sharing with us. Do we have someone else that wouldn't mind sharing? Yes.
It makes me feel safe.
Oh, I'm sorry. They
I feel safe and whole when I speak up and step into my power and name it when people ignore, overlook, or otherwise devalue me because I am Black and because I am a woman.
Yes. Oh my God. Thank you so much for sharing that. Wow. So powerful. Yes, I'm just taking it. No, sorry. No, that's so powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I want you all to know that you have the power to transform your reality. In my work with youth in particular, youth of color in particular, educators of color, what's important is not that we just become critically conscious about what social ills and oppression and harm exists, but also about our agency and capacity to transform it and to relish in the victory and wholeness of who we already are and who we can be. And so I'm hoping that what you started to write, that you'll share it with each other, that you will share it with the people that make you feel the most safe, and that you will take the next step, which is to sit down and actually visualize. So that is, you shared that when, right? When you feel overlooked and ignored, that's so triggering. But to take the time, something so powerful. That's why I got so excited. Like, so powerful about the next step, which means that you don't have to wait until you're in that situation again to try to figure out how to practice that. You can start now, just envisioning how that feels in your body, in your mind, in your spirit, right? And what it looks like for you to show up in the way that you just named. Because the more you engage in that act of visualization, I promise you, when that happens again, you'll be equipped with the tools to be congruent with the way that you know to value yourself in any space, right? Thank you so much. I appreciate it so much. I'm gonna close by sharing that these are 4 ways that I've been thinking about how we actualize what I'm starting to call a way-making hope. I believe in way-making. And I believe in way-making hope as distinct from empty notions of hope that just ask us to just wish that some kind of peace is on the other side of, whatever. There's like some kind of abstraction. And so I invite you, as you think about engaging in your own pattern transformations, to think about the power of these 4 elements and to engage in a way-making hope, one that establishes change and makes a way not just for you, but for others. That is the work of transcendence, understanding that systems of coloniality and racism and capitalism have sought to reduce people of color, in particular Black and brown people, and to bodily labor. And what does it mean for us to understand ourselves as transcendent beings so that we are not just so tethered to the immediacy of what is here now, but we understand ourselves to be so much more expansive than that. I want you to think about the power of transformation so that we understand that, like I said, this agency, this capacity to transform, to engage in this is where the way-making hope, where the tangible, palpable hope comes from, because we can change at the very level of the neuroplasticity, right? We can change at that level. We can change our emotions. We can change our behaviors. The congruence that we just lifted up, that when we talk about way-making, it's going to require us, and racial healing work is going to require us to be congruent with our values, because guess what? We have to call the institutions we navigate to be congruent with their values. They all got some anti-racism statement that they're not living in accordance with in their everyday policies and practices, right? But that calling in of our institutions begins with making sure that we're showing up with that integrity ourselves. And then finally, this refuge, because I'm not going to hold you. A lot of this is some long-term stuff. And right now, I need refuge. I need spaces that are safe. I need spaces that are sacred. I need spaces that are healing. I need spaces when I'm tired of this. I need spaces now that can't always hinge on some future world. Like, I need it now. And so to find those communities and those contexts that are sacred for you so that you can sustain yourself in the ongoing work of racial healing. Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to continue building with each other. Thank you. Thank you.
So if we would take what time is it now? It's like 10. Okay. So let's take a nice break and come back at 10:30, and we'll do questions and answers then. It's what now? Oh, 10:50. Oh, I thought you said 10:15. I was like, I thought it was okay. So 10:50. So let's come back in 20 minutes from whatever your clock says, and we'll do Q&A at that time. Okay. Thank you, Dr. J.
Understand what's going on here. So growing up, like I didn't become Dr. J not being in these spaces or not knowing how to perform standard English, but I was blessed to have my family who's just unapologetic about the beauty and brilliance of their culture, and out of school organizations who at a very young age gave so many of us a platform to question our world, and educators in my life who told the truth. So I knew what I was doing. I'm like, okay, this is the game I'm playing, and this is the game that I'm also about to change. So when you go to Dr. J's classes, it's a different experience than the classes I took, right? And so that's a lot of what the conversation is. It's about making sure that, yes, we have to go through these things, but it's not to keep them the same. And it's not to feed us the lie that, pulling your pants up and speaking a certain way is gonna get you freedom. It's really about transforming what that looks like. So that's how I'll begin to answer that question.
Hi.
Hi.
I was thinking about your messages and what you were talking about this morning, and how to think about them as a white person who doesn't have the same racial trauma that you were talking about, and the sort of the learning and how to use that in my own work, my own vision. And I was having two thoughts, and I'm interested to see other thoughts that other people may have too. Okay, one of them was in the same way that you were talking about training yourself to find your congruence or to find your voice and be true to that. I think there are ways that people who enter spaces with privilege and power that's so internalized that we may not even realize it, need to train ourselves to realize that and to feel discomfort maybe in ways that we might feel comfortable. So that was one thing I was thinking about. The other thing I was thinking about was the sort of retraining ourselves about how we respond when we're in spaces like this and we get called out or called in or called on something that that we may not realize that we're doing, and that we can retrain ourselves to try to not hear that with defensiveness or fighting, but to hear that with openness and learningness. So that was two messages I was trying to take from what you're saying, and I'm just curious to hear other people's reflections or what you think about that.
Sure. So you asked first that you hear other people. Did anybody else want to respond? To what's being shared? All right, I'll jump in case. Did somebody take it? Yeah. Oh, for the next. Oh, okay. Yeah. So what I'll say in response to your first point about the values is that it's really important that we not just identify. All values are not good, right? So being congruent with your values, America is very congruent with its values. like that's congruent. You did pass that law to erase us. That makes sense, right? Congruent. It's effective. So what's important for us to think about is not just what are our values, but what are the ideologies that are shaping our values, right? So when you think about coming from a space of privilege, if you think that, you know that there are patterns that you're engaged in, behaviors that you're engaged in, that they are congruent with particular beliefs that are rooted in privilege, then that is the thing that you must think about transforming. And then it becomes a question of, well, then how do I begin to heal and transform the value system and the ideologies that I've embraced? Where do I turn? So right now, at the Center of Racial Justice and Youth Engaged Research, we have a variety of programs, and the programs are actually started by the students, right? So either the youth in the community or the students at the school, like the undergrad or grad students. One program is the White Co-Conspirator Network, in which we've had to kind of like double brand as the White Allies Network, because White Co-Conspirators was tripping people like, what's that? And the students on campus was like, what is that? They were a little nervous. I was like, no, they're allies. So that network is a space where a collective of white students, faculty, and now youth are coming into the space to thinking about, well, what does it mean for us to do the work? And they've actually opted to ground their knowledge development in Black feminist praxis. They're trying to understand and educate themselves, because it became very clear when we built the center that the students of color was just like, we love y'all, but it's not our job to help you figure out how to dismantle racism. And so this collective came together, and they've become students of Black feminist praxis so that they could understand how to disrupt the ideologies that they've inherited, right? So I'm saying that to say, and they do a lot of work on campus in the community right now that's mobilizing white people around doing the work of dismantling racism. I'm saying that to say that when you're coming from a place of privilege, before you can think about the way that you become congruent, make sure that the value that you're trying to actualize is one that's not rooted in white supremacy. And how do you question that? How do you dismantle that? How do you become a student of something else and start to transform your mind, and then start to select and identify values that you want to actualize, and then do the work of thinking, how do I need to be congruent in actualizing this? Because I cannot say that I value people of color and then show up and engage in microaggressions every day that I'm unaware of, right? So that congruency is important for all of us. Thank you for your question.
All right, hi y'all. We have a question from our fabulous Zoom attendees. This is from Tia Smith, they, them pronouns.
Hey, Tia.
How do you navigate showing up whole in academic spaces where you are not the curator?
Where you're not the curator?
Yes.
So fancy. I was like, ooh. So it's a lot. It's connected to what I shared earlier about making sure you understand where you're rooted, right? I work at UMass Amherst. That's not where I'm rooted. My capacity to show up there whole, it doesn't rise and fall on who UMass is or is not, because I'm very clear that they don't have the capacity to be for me what I need from my community and something beyond them, right? And so this is an example. So I teach a doctoral seminar every other semester. And I've decided the theme of the seminar when I teach doctoral seminar is purpose or perish. So in academia, there is the common, we know commonly publish or perish, because what even is that? But this is what we learn, right? You better publish or you're gonna perish in academia. And so the course is about working with grad students to understand how harmful that is, and to really understand that they are grounded in a transcendent sense of purpose that's not tethered to institutional affiliation. Because at the end of the day, if Dr. J can't be at UMass Amherst, Dr. J's purpose is still gonna live through, right? It's divinely ordered. And so at the end of the day, it becomes, your wholeness cannot be tethered to institutional affiliation or validation. And that comes when you understand and decide where you're rooted. It comes when you decide to create your own scripts and not just the scripts that are inherited. And that's broad, but what can happen is the way that we engage in the congruence work, you figure out, well, what are the habits? If I'm going into this space and I know it's academic, I know I'm not the curator, I know the kind of experiences that I might have there that might threaten my sense of wholeness, then how is it that I want to show up in that space as a visitor? Because I have to be there in this particular time. So Tia, I hope that began to answer your question. We have a mic request over here. Oh, 100%. Come on, Dr. J. Thank you.
Awesome. Hello, my name is Selwa. She, hers. My question is something that's coming up for me deeply is the idea of aligning and affirming a thought fully through. What I think was sitting with me is being in this organizing work, art justice work, etc., being in the mind, imagination, but then having to be in the body. I think that is like one of the big challenges that I have, and for so many reasons. But I wonder, like, for folks who do this system change work daily in a very intentional, visible way that, you know, are pushing up against systems, getting reactions from systems, and struggle to prioritize or see the body as worthy to communicate with, as worthy to be taken care of. And that's clearly like an ideological not being congruent with, because we say what we say about others, but then ourselves. How do you, in practice with the affirmation, even if it's not hitting, like, is there what can be another tap or another turn of a key that could get someone to the next step of beginning to embody and value that communication?
Yeah.
I know that's like,
Yeah, I thank you for your question. It's a tough one. I spoke about the body keeps the score, and I wanted us to know about the trauma living in the body, but really what it speaks to, it's not that the trauma lives in the body or the mind. It speaks to the mind-body connection, that these things are inextricably bound. So what you're naming, if I'm attending to the mind and not the body, or the body of not, or not, and not the mind, is counterintuitive, right? It's impossible. They're tethered, right? And so you're naming another area of incongruence, because I cannot say. So for myself, I wrote this in my book. I spent the summer of 2014 on every street from Ferguson to Brooklyn screaming that Black Lives Matter. And my Black life, I was not taken care of in my body. Growing up, I've always been at war with my body in terms of my self-image and my struggle with my weight and my identity in that way. And it was a turning point for me when I was like, wait a minute, this is not congruent. Like, I'm organizing on the ground, doing the work. Mentally, I know all the things, but my body is not expendable. And so in order for me to be congruent, in order for me to show up fully, so now my health practices involve my visualization, meditation, prayer. You know, my Christianity is central to who I am. But my eating and my workout regimen is a therapeutic space. I've had to heal my relationship with my body by changing my relationship with exercise and all of those things. And it's become crucial to my capacity. And I'm not doing it just so that I can show up in this work, but it's become crucial to my capacity and ability to show up in this work fully. Uncle Covey, he says something in the book. He says, private victories precede public victories. And I've internalized that so deeply that I now know that it is the things that no one can see in my life. When I'm taking ownership and I'm doing that work that is invisible to you, that's where 90% of my focus is. What you get to see is the overflow, right? And so to the degree that I show up for myself in my mind, body, and soul, when no one is looking, I come with a different power here. You know, so if you need another turn of the key, if you really believe in liberation work, if you really believe in organizing, if you believe in the power of Ubuntu, that I am because you are, that my wellness is bound up in yours, then I need you to show up well, right? Or in the process of wellness. Because you can't be suffering and I'm okay. That's not how Ubuntu works, right? So I would say to those folks struggling with that if you want to truly be congruent, the body cannot be neglected. It can't. And the final thing I'll say is that what I noticed and what really kind of got me to catch myself, because I work with a lot of young people, is that hidden curriculum of being an organizer, where the young people look at you and you saying all this stuff about liberation and they looking at you and they like, you tired. Like, right? They looking at you be tired and haggard, not taking care of yourself. You're not eating right. Nothing is going right. And they read into that. If I really want to care about justice and equity in my people, I have to suffer. And I'm like, no, baby, you can be well, right? And so that's another thing that calls me to the responsibility of showing up in my body, in my mind, in my soul, my spirit, fully in Lord. Yeah. Thank you. Yes. No problem.
Hey, y'all. We have another question from the internet. So this is Sky Collins, they, them. You mentioned America is very congruent with its values. Are there any particular values that you see as especially pervasive or problematic, or as a deeper, subtler roots of racism that people tend not to notice? And do you have thoughts on how we can work to encourage change?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, America makes it easy to find those. Like, sorry. So you know what it was? Somebody tweeted not too long ago. I can't remember what happened. Something happened in Houston. I can't remember. There was a crisis, and it was just like no national support. Like it was just no national support, and the people in crisis were, per usual, particularly like something like that. And somebody on the internet said, "America's not prepared for anything but war." And I was like, that is so true. Don't nobody be trying to figure out how can we improve the military. Like they got that on lock, right? They are congruent. That budget, right? The mayor of New York City just increased the police budget and decreased the education budget with some nonsense about there's less students now, right? That was the rationale. Congruent. It's congruent with America's values because what we value, we invest in, and we show up fully in that, right? As a nation. When it comes to the education crisis, when it comes to situations like all of us, big time America frazzled. The math is not mathing, right? And so these are some of the ways for me, right? And across all cities, nationally, the school budgets are schools are constantly being defunded, right? And so I have I hope my life's work is about ideas about how to change it. Like I don't even know where to start. But I'm hoping that, this work that I'm engaged in supporting what it means to engage in racial healing on the individual, institutional, and larger levels is how we get to work in making sure to dismantle and call it out. Because not for nothing, when we start to name how harmful and horrid values are, it does something for calling America to responsibility of transformation on a broader scale. So it's not just some sweeping victory for all of that stuff. Like we out here and the work is getting done and transformation is happening. Thank you for that question.
One, thank you for being here. Farron and I are in church the whole time. Thank you. We appreciate you. And my question is, because you're from Massachusetts and we're from Connecticut, so you understand how pervasive whiteness looks like and how deeply tied Black and brown folks can get to institutions for all the things you talked about. Is there something that you can leave with us Black femmes and Black bodies that constantly do this work, but are radicalized in doing it in a way that is not comfortable for folks here in our areas? And we are often, and I'm thinking of myself, are often erased and pushed out of spaces that we have helped build, that we help get the funding for, and then we're pushed out. And there is a willingness to erase identities like mine, this queer body that visibly is alternative, so I cannot fit into the boxes of respectability politics of Blackness here. Is there something, and I'm hoping it's linked to joy, like you were talking about, because that's where I'm at. I'm trying to create joy and liberation for Black and brown folks. Is there something that you can give us that I can chew on in those moments where I have done my affirmation, I have did the bubble baths, and I went and communed with the flowers and did all the things, and I still feel thrown away, erased, and broken, and am trying to heal that so that I can continue to show up in the ways that this community knows me to show up in, but it is getting increasingly harder. It is weighing on my body in a way that I'm looking forward to connecting and doing that congruence affirmation of how I can change and shift that. But is there something that I can use while I'm doing that, and for the other folks in my lived experience, to help us get through when we are just feeling all the erasure, all the violence, all the things that are not physical, so folks will gaslight us when we try to call it out? Is there something that you can give us?
A couple of things are coming to mind as you share. Thank you for sharing so authentically. The one is the final point that I left you all with in terms of refuge, right? Because I know that at the end of the day, so okay, here's the way that I started thinking about refuge. There's a lot of work, about powerful, necessary work going on around abolitionism in education, abolitionist teaching, right? We got to do that work. And I think about abolitionism alongside fugitivity, right? Because when I think about our ancestors and what it looked like for them to engage in the work of getting American chattel slavery in particular abolished, necessary work. But over the 400 years, right, if I'm working towards freedom and abolition is not present right now, and I'm trying to preserve myself, I need to seek spaces of refuge in the now. And it's not that abolition is not pressing and urgent and needed, but my hope can't just rest on abolition. I need refuge to sustain me now, because slavery is painful now. And even if I'm on the journey of escaping to freedom, what happens is it wasn't necessarily this like straight route. It was moving from freedom to freedom, right? From refuge to refuge, from safe space to safe space, and absconding in that way. And I see that as a template. I see that as a blueprint. As you chart out liberation, how can you begin? Y'all seen Encanto? Because I started my whole semester with Encanto. If y'all ain't seen Encanto, watch Encanto. It's everything. I watched it like 1,000 times. Like the first, I was gonna show y'all the first scene. I might still show it. Because the first scene, Encanto is so dope. I'm about to spoil it for you if you didn't watch it. The first scene is about, it's about the way that this Encanto formed. This space of refuge formed for this family that was displaced, right? And in that, they also were gifted with magic. The problem was that they tried to hold on. They forgot that they were the magic. And they tried to hold on to that space of refuge for too long. And it was supposed to be a place of transformation, right? And so how I started the semester with my students was I'm just like, identify your encantos. Like, where are your spaces of refuge and transformation? Where do you need to go? Where do you need to abscond? Because the long road is towards freedom. But where do you need to abscond right now? Right? Like, what do you need to do? And so I invite us to do that work, right? Because it has to be the both and. It's not abolition or fugitivity. Both of them are necessary for our survival. So sometimes those things are places. Sometimes they are people. Sometimes they are habits. Sometimes it's divine. Whatever it is, again, we have to be rooted in something that transcends the limitations of the world around us. We have to be if we're going to survive. And so I hope that begins to answer that question for you. Thank you.
Oh, that was so much. And I'm thinking about my own Encanto of Sankofa Learning Center,
Yes.
an African-centered Montessori program for Black children in New Hallville, that in this very room a couple of years ago, I said I was going to do. And in the next couple of days, I'm going into my planning year that is funded and that was dreamed up because of people in this room like you all. So I'm floored right now, okay? But one question that I have for you is, you know, what is your liberation dream? Like, what,
Yeah.
you know, like, when you win, when we all win,
Yeah.
what does that look like for you? What does it feel like?
Yeah.
What does it sound like?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. It's one of them questions I'll be asking my students. It's like, for you. When you're doing your best work, what does it look like in the world? So for me, my liberation dream comes with what it means for us to show up as unapologetically and full in ourselves in every space, right? And in spaces that are capacious enough for us, that are co-constructed by us, that we don't have to engage in constant acts of translation, but we just exist fully, right? I don't believe in forcing myself at someone else's table. I believe we have our own tables. And to the degree that people would show up to those tables and sit and eat and learn and commune and build, I believe in a world where the cultural contours that we've navigated as a society have largely occurred through violence. And what would have been possible? What is possible when we engage in exchanges across lines of difference in ways that's connected to community, right? That you come into my space and I come into yours, not as an attempt to control or exploit you, but for us to be engaged in meaningful and powerful exchange of just the beauty of humanity, right? So like my version of liberation, there are no borders. Like, we're not owning and displacing lands and people. There's not this horrible disproportionate distribution of wealth across our world, right? So it's huge, it's big. But for me, my life is a love letter to Black people across the whole world. Like, that's what I show up for. And for us to be well and full and powerful in all senses, and abundance is my word for 2022. So for us to be abundant in every sense of the word is really what it's what I seek to actualize every day. Thank you for that question. Oh, where are we at?
No, I had a question
Oh,
actually.
okay. I was like, ooh.
That's funny. So, and I love that my sister Amelia, we raised our hands at the same time because we've both been holding visions for educational spaces. And what I'm really curious about in moving toward this Academy for Liberation Education is the parents, and the challenge of parents holding on so much to what their experience was, and their fear for their children not being taught in a way to replicate the system, to be able to enter the system. And so even talking to parents about this vision of a high school that has a lens of liberation, they're like, but what about, yes, but what about? And so I'm just curious what your experience has been in opening these doors toward wholeness and liberation for young people in terms of the parents that are oftentimes the gatekeepers for a white supremacy culture for survival.
Yeah, that's an amazing question. Thank you so much. So when I think about the parents and their capacity to kind of, replicate and reify some of what we're trying to upend, I think about the fact that oftentimes we're fed the lie that school is preparing us for whatever levels of success, right? The reality is that school is severely underpreparing all children for the real world, because white supremacy doesn't even make any sense, right? Like I'm a member of the global majority, right? So the way that our world is set up, if you really want to be successful, you're really gonna need to know more than what's really going on in these schools. You're gonna need to be equipped differently. And it's so bad that even on the job market, it's harder on these corporations that are trying to hire students who know how to take tests, but don't know how to engage in like real world issues and create like generatively for companies anymore, because they know how to take tests, but they haven't even been exposed to cultural differences. They don't know how to problem solve in certain ways. And so I would flip their deficit-based lens and be like, actually what we're doing is adding value. This is more expansive than any education they could seek elsewhere. Because what we don't want to do is under-prepare your child for the real world. So I would flip it so that it's an asset-based lens, and so that they could understand the limitations of what's happening in school, how harmful high-stakes testing is, what it does to the long-term mental health effects, right? And so what you're doing is seeking to not engage in that kind of damage. And I believe, because parents have been through this, and I believe parents know implicitly and desire something that is more effective, but they're scared because they don't, so I understand the fears. But that's how I usually talk about it. I always talk about it. I'm like, oh, because I do a lot of work on multiple literacies. Oh, no. I want my children to know how to speak the Queen's English, right? Because they need to get access. I'm like, actually, if you pay attention to this, and this, it turns out that multiple language practices actually are more representative of our global reality and better prepare children, not just cognitively, but in terms of their competencies and the world to succeed. And parents are like, you know what, right? And it's not that they're not gonna know this other stuff. Actually, what happens is what we do so much, it transcends the goal. I'm like, these standards, I work with teachers and I'm just like, the state got standards, but do you? Like, what are your standards? And when you set those standards, these little itty bitty standards, that's cute or whatever. But what we set is like, by the time we done, our students are like, oh, that's light, right? It's because we just we shrink ourselves in the face of these standards. So again, that asset-based approach becomes really important, of course.
Okay, I've been trying to not say anything. Or because I don't have questions per se, but I have trains of thought that you've gotten into that I'd like for you to expand upon.
Okay.
Okay, one of them is this thing that you're just talking about, and you started out with parents as gatekeepers. And I see it as being teachers as gatekeepers, other students as gatekeepers, administration definitely as gatekeepers, businesses as gatekeepers. We're all victims of this, okay, I'm gonna put it this way, white supremacy. We're all victims of this privilege, this America that we've grown up with, and we don't even see it. Some of us have the disease of narcissism. Some of us have this disease of inferiority, but we're all suffering from a paralysis that stops us from moving, that stops us from looking at our points of liberation, that stops us from cooperating and collaborating with each other for our own growth. And I'd like you to just, because that's where I see you going, is you're talking about us expanding our capacity to be human. So I'm just wondering if you could talk more about that.
Yeah, so from what I'm understanding, it's making me think of, in critical race theory, the real one, not whatever they're arguing about on the news. In actual critical race theory, one of the tenets is interest convergence. Has anybody heard of interest convergence? A few people? I always feel icky thinking about this, but hey, it's how the world works. Interest convergence refers to the fact that most of the legislation that's been passed for Black people and people of color in our society has been passed only when its benefits converged with the interests of white people, including the abolition of slavery, including Brown v. Board, right? Now, because that's a thing, one of the strategies that I engage in my organizing and in my work, in my liberation work, is identifying the interests that I want to converge with when I'm thinking about people who might be even ideologically opposed, right? So if we're thinking about parents in this moment, if we're thinking about administrators, and we're thinking about that level, this is why I start to say, don't you want your children to be prepared for an increasingly multilingual world? Yeah. All right, so like, let's do this, right? Because our interests are going to converge around what it means for our children to be equipped, right? And so you're talking about a world where we have all of this gatekeeping, and some of that is so rigid that it really does take power mapping, like mapping out where the power is and organizing around what it means to converge with some of those interests, right? It's actually going to cost the city less money for these kids to not end up in jail, right? Like, if that, you respond to numbers, right? That's not my value system. This person holding the power to have real impact on the bodily harm of our children responds to numbers. I'm gonna show you how this budget is gonna be negatively impacted if you keep this policy in place. Let our interests converge here, right? Without losing our values. Like, I'm not about to reduce these children to no numbers, but I understand that there's a power map here. You know what I'm saying? So to the degree that white supremacy is preserved and crystallized in certain areas of people who are gatekeeping people of power, I believe that learning and figuring out where interests converge and using that as a subversive tactic is a really important strategy for organizing. So I hope that responds to that in some way.
Are we there? Okay, great. There's a question from Johannes Cifuentes. You mentioned DEI is failing. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
I did not say that. I said DEI. I said they're hiring a lot of DEI people, but they're getting rid of a lot of the positions right now. So that's all I can speak to. I didn't say DEI is failing. Hilarious. So what I did mention is that in the wake of the George Floyd protests, Breonna Taylor protests, everybody had a DEI position open. We got Black Lives Matter Avenue. We got it painted on the streets. You know, everybody painted on their foreheads or whatever happened. And then the next year, when there was the backlash, a lot of those positions went away because it was performative, because we were looking at the performance of racial equity. I wouldn't even call it that, but we weren't doing the systemic work. We had labels, we had statements, we had temporary positions, but now legislation is being passed, because that's where things really get institutionalized, to institutionalize the exact opposite of that. And so that is a problem. I'm not a fan of even how, when the DEI positions were coming in, of how they were being played out. So like what I did name was the fact that a lot of that DEI work was about making visible the trauma of Black and brown people as a way to educate everyone else, as a way to move people to this emotionality so that they could actually engage in change. It's centered a lot on educating white people, and so then marginalized a lot of other of racial groups. And it often was more like a checklist, like, what are the 10 anti-racist strategies? And it's like, what, right? So instead of actual institutional change and accountability, it was a series of workshops and conferences and talks and talks and talks. And it's like, while people were talking, other people were passing legislation, and now here we are. So that's what I'll say. I will not adhere to the DEI is failing. That's not what I said. I just want to be careful with my words and however I can. But thank you. I hope that responds to the question in some way. Not 100% this time. No, I'm joking. I'll take it.
Hi, Dr. J. Thank you, first of all.
Of course. Thank you.
I'm Barun. I use any and all pronouns. I'm wondering if you can offer us some wisdom around how you approach collaboration. Because I find, it's at that level that I'm interested in how can we address power dynamics that show up at the interpersonal level when we are trying to co-create together, right? We're here with, consciously, co-creating effective organizations, right? And so, yeah, I'm just wondering if you can offer us some wisdom from your experience co-leading the institute where you work, or in other partnerships, where you've worked with school and community partners. How are there principles or practices and how you approach, collaboration, co-creating that you can offer us? Absolutely.
Thank you for that question. There's a book that I don't suggest you read. No shade, but whatever. It's Start With Why. You don't need to read it. But what's important, there's a really important principle that I took away from the book. And what it does is it spends a lot of time really in thinking about the corporate world and how successful corporate models don't sell people on a what, they sell people on a why. So instead of identifying what I do and then trying to engage you around what I do, what I really need to attune to is why I do it. And people are more compelled. So one example in the book, they're just like, if Apple made a car, everybody would buy it. Why would you buy an Apple car? Because you believe internally in their why. We don't even know, what does Apple make? Anything Apple makes, we'll buy it, right? Because it's not really about what they do. It's something that we're sold on that's deeper about who Apple is, right? All right, don't read the book. But what you need to know is what really became important, even to how we founded the center, was what it means to collaborate and connect with people based on shared values and not on shared activities, right? So let me tell you, I know a lot of people that do youth work with youth of color. Some of them do it because they feel like they need to save those youth of color from themselves. We do the same what, you got a different why. So I can't be in community with you because if I'm not congruent with you on the level of values, it's not gonna last. It's just like when you was younger, you had all these friends, you got older, you were like, I don't even really like this person. And you didn't realize it, but y'all just had fun because y'all did the same things. You had the same what? The same activities. You got older, you became more attuned to your values. You realize your values don't match, and then the relationship can't be sustained. So this is true on a personal level, but it's also true on the collective level when we're thinking about collaborating. So as a center, one of the things that myself and the co-director think about when we get an invitation to collaborate, to be in community, to build, does this entity, does this person, does this thing have the same why? Do they have the same value system in order for us to move forward? Because if not, unfortunately, it's a no. At the end of the day, what you do will change for the rest of your life. Why you do it should be core, it should be grounded, it should be sustainable. That's called integrity, right? So if me and you collaborate and today we're doing this and we have the same why, tomorrow we're gonna do that, it's gonna be successful too because we got the same why. You know what I'm saying? So that it ends up feeding into those power dynamics shift when you are connected around the same why. The way that you navigate harm shifts when you have the same why, right? Because if I'm community and you, we all have the capacity to harm each other. Harm will happen. But if we got different whys, when harm happens, what we do is going to be very different. And that's how the values start to reveal themselves. And you're just like, oh, I made a mistake, right? So yeah, that's how I would answer that.
We don't just connect about shared activities, but shared identities. Often it's like we're both black or brown.
Yes,
so
exactly.
we think that you know that we are aligned.
Yep. Nope. Values, right? That's on point.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Thank you, Dr. J. I am curious, you talked about interest convergence. You talked about like playing the game to change the game, and you've created something new that's rooted in liberation. And I'm curious about the difference of like, and where, not really the difference, but the balance of creating something new versus playing in the system to change the system. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. To me, it's more about just being honest about the limitations of these places and systems. I never want to be, again, those institutional affiliations sound nice, but at the end of the day, we got to be honest about what they are and what they're not. I also believe so much in what Dr. Cynthia Dillard reminds us in remembering, right? And coming from the work of Toni Morrison, of what it means to remember for those of us in communities of color, those things that white coloniality has lured us away from ourselves and our communities, what it means to return and to restore, and not just remember intellectually, but remember in terms of healing and joining back up with those things. For me, building and creating outside of like big institutional contexts and stuff like that is a form of remembering and being grounded in spaces that are not necessarily contingent on those ideologies and values. But at the end of the day, I live here. So like, all right, you know, like, so there's a way that I will still engage, and also a way that I seek to mitigate the harm that this place perpetuates against other people of color. So like, I'm sitting here like, I know that I can't stand the way that schooling functions in our society. And I know that a lot of students spend more time in school than they spend with their families every day. So I can't ignore it, right? So I have to figure out how to hold this place accountable, how to do that work, but also invite those young people to understand, hey, we can build things outside of this and within it. And so it's not mutually exclusive as we work towards those goals of liberation that don't have us like so bound to these structures. Oh, we're over time. I thought you was gonna give me the look. No, but yes, no, thank you so much. And that was, we're out of time, but I appreciate you all so much and such beautiful questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I had gotten the word that the lunch had arrived late. That's why I was letting it go. So we're going to be good. Oh my God. You know, I just love basking together in truth which there's a very thin line for me between truth and love. They feel so the same when you're in it. You know what I mean? Like when you're soaking in it, I can't differentiate between love and truth, which is what this has felt like for me. So I'm so grateful, and I'm grateful that we will have some workshopping of this in the afternoon, because just answering the one question that you gave, the one piece that we did, I know I got a major opening for myself in that. So more of that this afternoon. So before we go downstairs for lunch, I would love to invite Slate to come forward and just let us know of another opportunity that is coming right down the road. Yeah, this is Brother Slate.
Okay, let's see if I can do this right now. Thanks, y'all. I'm Slate Ballard. I use he, him pronouns, and I work with CEIO here. This has been unbelievably powerful, Dr. J. Thank you so much. Neonos asked me up here to give what I call like a trailer or a teaser. I'm a dad. I have 3 kids. I don't get to go to the movies that often, but I love the movies and I love trailers. So I have a trailers app on my phone, and I watch trailers. I almost never see movies. So this is a trailer to and an invitation. In the next few weeks, by the end of June, CIO will be relaunching a program we call Seeding Conscious Co-Creation. And it is about practicing the very things that Dr. J has been speaking about today. It is about forming communities of practice to practice conscious co-creation, conscious use of our authentic selves in order to drive and create more liberation in our communities, in ourselves, in society. And that's what it is about. And I am so excited that this opportunity is going to be put out there. And so keep a lookout for it. We're going to be doing lots of email blasts, and we're going to be doing some information and inquiry sessions with the community to get your thoughts. Where do you want to see the conscious use of power used and practiced in society? What areas? Is it education? Is it healthcare? Is it the environment? Is it who knows what? Whatever it is for you. And that is what this offering is. And so keep a lookout for it, y'all. It's an exciting opportunity that CIO will be putting out. Thank you.
So again, lunch is served downstairs, and then we will come back up probably around 1:30 to have our afternoon session. Thank you again. Thank you all. So welcome back from a full lunch. Just welcoming again Dr. J for the afternoon. Yay.
Hello, hello. Can you hear me? All right. Let's get into it. We got some bops online, I think. I don't know where that's coming from. Okay, cool. Thank you, DJ. How y'all feeling? Everybody feeling? Nods? Okay. Nods. Seeing as we were speaking of Encanto, I have to do it. I like to begin workshop settings, class settings, with something called Writing for Full Presence. It's an activity that I inherited from Dr. Yolanda Sealy Ruiz and adapted it. And so I am going to ask that you all take out something to write with and on. And we're going to look at the opening clip of Encanto, because the Spirit has led me here based on our earlier conversation. And then I'm going to have a together. So let's check out this opening clip. Oh, hold on, let me fix is it the volume here? All right, let's see. May not have been here, just the premise of it, that just in a moment of crisis, a place of refuge was formed for this family, and they were gifted with a miracle. And so I'm going to ask you to reflect on these two questions. What is an encanto and or place of refuge in your life? Who or what has sheltered you in moments of trial or transformation? All right, if you find a comfortable place to complete your thought, I'm gonna ask that you find like at least 1 to 2 max other people in the room to share with. And you can, if you're willing and or able, you can get up and find someone across the room who you may not know. Otherwise, you can certainly turn and talk, but I'm gonna ask that you just introduce yourself and how you're doing in this moment. And then you have the option of sharing either what came up for you, or if that feels a little too vulnerable at this time, you can share how it felt to engage in this reflection. Okay? All right. Any clarifying questions about that? Okay. You're going to have about like 5 minutes. So just try to make sure that the time is divided equitably. Thank you for that question. All right. All right, go for it. All right. Y'all know the no music clap? I'm from New York. No music. No music. No music. No music. All right. Let's have one or two people share out what came up for them as they either reflected or engaged in conversation. You can jump in. You can, yeah, just jump in authentically, organically.
You know, that was part of it. I initially felt uncomfortable actually jumping into the circle, which is unusual for me because I'm pretty comfortable in circles, but was being recorded a little uneasy. But for me, in moments of trial or transformation, it's been my loved ones. I have an amazing group of friends, many who are here right now. And yeah, that's that. I have taken deep refuge in that, particularly as of the last couple of months. There's been lots of funky stuff happening. So yeah, my friends have really stepped up for me, and that felt pretty amazing, because I'm not also used to leaning on people in the way that I've had to lean on people over the last couple of months. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Others who want to share, one or two more.
I had just shared that a place of refuge for me in life was my grandmother's house. What I didn't share with in my group was just that as a kid, growing up poor, and growing up in a city that was where I should have been a statistic, literally going like around the corner to her house was just an escape from all of that, and just a place for me to just, you know, be a kid without the pressures of all those things. So yeah.
Thank you so much. And do we have one more person that wants to share?
Hello, everybody. My place of encanto is my home, and who shelter it in moments of trial or transformation. That will be my husband and my mom. My mom mostly for support when I have issues with my husband. Because guess what? Not every marriage is perfect. But my husband, he's been the major supporter because he's always told me like it is, even when I like it or not. And he always pushed me to do my best.
Thank you all for sharing, for engaging in the activity. For many of us who are called to this kind of work, we often are the refuge for everyone else. And to the degree that we want to remain committed to that work, we have to understand that it is necessary, urgent, that we are careful about identifying and taking shelter in the spaces of refuge that we find and cultivate in our lives, right? So that's just to get us to open our reflection. What we're gonna do today in the way of an activity over the next few minutes is actually a Freudian culture circle. So I began doing Freudian culture circles in grad school, actually, and it's inspired by the work of Paulo Freire, who did this work in Brazil to organize sugarcane workers, to mobilize the oppressed around what it meant to engage in what they called a commitment to literacy as a practice of freedom, the goal was to engage in literacy, reading and writing, but then more importantly, a critical literacy, the development of a critical consciousness that is more than reading and writing words, but building the capacity to read and write the world around us. And so these 300 sugarcane workers mobilized and eventually were registered to vote. And through this process of developing their consciousness, this movement was so powerful that in 1964, just 2 years later, Ferry was jailed and exiled by a military coup, and the culture circles were forbidden. Because what it does is it moves us from a place of what Paulo Freire talks about, of operating as just objects of our oppressive reality, and then we move into our subjectivity, into our agency, into our capacity to really transform the world, but not just the world around us, but the world inside of us, right? And so I want to have us do this culture circle as a way to think about the way the work that we're all committed to on the systemic level, but then make connections to how our racial healing is bridged between the larger systemic work and the individual work that we need to do. So you're going to spend some time in small groups of 5 people max. And the way the culture circles work is that you are given what is called a code. And a code is a cultural artifact that, it's a cultural artifact. It can be a newspaper clipping, it can be a video, it can be some current events issue, it can be a meme, whatever it needs to be. And you spend time decoding that collectively. Typically, I do this with a group of multiple stakeholders, right? Like, so we'll be in a room and it'll have administrators, youth, parents, and this way we're engaged in this community democratic process in a collective space in ways that we usually don't have access to each other in these kind of conversations. So the code is what we decide what the code is, and then after receiving or witnessing the code, as a group, the first step you take is called the description of the code. What it means is that you take the time to just name what you see and not what it means. So if you see a brown dot in the image or the video, the brown dot does not mean life or hope or anything. It's just a brown dot, which is hard for us because we're really smart, and there's a lot of meaning that we immediately attach to what we see. So the goal of this step is to just notice, to just name what you see. Step 2, the first analysis, is when you can then move into attaching meaning to what you see. I saw a line that means hope. Okay, whatever it is that you want to attach meaning to, you begin doing that in the second step, right? So it means you're slowing down that process. The third step is a space where you start to think about real life. This is a place I really want us to attune to here, because real life refers to our lived experiences or our witnessed experiences. And that's when it becomes deeply personal. That's when we can start naming how this actually is connected to the racial healing work that we're committed to. So we can talk about this thing in abstract terms. Part of the reason why I like doing Furrian culture circles is because when you begin with a cultural artifact, it's something over there, and then we can opt into different levels of vulnerability, right? We don't just got to come with the full weight of oppression in the moment, which can be a lot, right? So you then opt into naming how the issues coming up in your conversation are connected to real life issues. For this particular session, real life issues that are connected to racial healing. Following that, you think about related problems, because we live in an ecological reality. We live in an interdependent reality. So one thing is not independent of the other, right? So if there is a problem with high suspension rates, what's a related problem to high suspension rates in schools? Over-policing, right? And so you could imagine that somehow in a vacuum, there's high suspension rates in school, but in reality, the way that our justice or injustice system is set up, over-policing and all these other issues are connected. There's an ecology of issues. So I want you to think about the related problems I want you to think then about not just the related problems in terms of context, but then we gotta, Angela Davis says that being radical is grabbing things by the root. What about the root causes? What's at the root? And then I'd like you all to think about action. I want you to think about action in connection with the racial healing work. I want you to reconnect to those real life narratives that you've been discussing in your group and think about what kind of racial healing action is necessitated by what we are unpacking in our conversation today. So I get it, we got to dismantle systems of oppression. Yes, and what racial healing work in this particular session needs to happen in terms of action based on what is evolving in this conversation? Any clarifying questions about those steps? And I'll be floating around as well. Does that make sense? All right, so you should take a picture of this because I'm gonna switch the slide to show you the code. And I'm going to count you off. Oh, I'm so bad at math. Because I'm always like, I'll count you up by 5 and then we'll have groups of 5. Absolutely not. That's not how math works. I'm gonna ask you to create groups of 5 on your own because I don't do this well. So find each other, create groups of 5, and then once you do, I will switch over to the code, the image, and then just give you a little bit of guidance around how to start doing that. So please find your groups of 5. Once you found your groups of 5, please all raise your hands so I know that you have a group of 5. Yeah, move your chairs around, all that good stuff. Once you have your group of 5, please send up a representative to get 1 chart paper and 1 marker. Just 1 representative, please come get one chart paper and 1 marker. And yeah, and you can stick that up somewhere. I know it's tricky. Find a door, find a piece of wall. Just take 1 each, yeah. Find a door, find a piece of wall and stick it somewhere that you all can collaborate and have somebody who's writing. For our folks online, can you identify someone? Oh, they're gone, huh? They're in their rooms? I'm sorry. Can you tell them, are they in their rooms? Are folks online in their rooms yet? Probably not, right? They are already in their breakout rooms?
We're still here.
Okay, good. Yeah, not yet. So for folks online, I'm gonna ask that once you are in your breakout rooms, first of all, take a picture of the screen. And secondly, once you are in your breakout rooms, have one person who's going to... Okay, just for folks online, I'm gonna ask you to identify someone in your breakout room to write. And I'm gonna ask you to take a picture of this slide and the next slide for when you go into your breakout rooms. Okay. So just find some place where you can post and write. Right, good. Somewhere, I know it's tricky. So just find a wall that you can convene around with your poster. Because the conversation is gonna take place while somebody's gonna take notes. Oh, do we have any more markers? What do we need, like 2 more markers? 4 more? At least 2. Yeah, if you want to like abscond away into like a room, we can do that. For people who are popping into another room, I'm gonna go get them. All right, so let's do this. All right. So there are people who are waiting on a marker. Hopefully markers are finding their way to you. For people who popped into another room, I'm gonna ask you to just pop in very briefly just to see the code or take a picture of it. I like the drama, so I like take time before I like reveal it. Y'all ready? Yeah? All right. So you are going to be working with this image. So feel free to, this will be up. If you're in another room, feel free to take a picture of it and go through each of the steps using this image. Remember, only name what you notice for the first step. I'm going to ask that everyone reconvene in the main room, please. Yeah, I know. Yeah. All right, we're reconvening in the main room. No, I'm trying to get them back there. Thanks. All right. All right, we're going to spend the rest of our time unpacking what came up for us. But before we do that, because I know we're just going to get like really enthralled in this conversation, I want you to take literally 60 seconds, just take a moment, understand that you in some way, shape, or form exist in the world of this image. And I want you to take a minute to jot down your thinking about what your racial healing work needs to look like, even if it's just a little note to yourself to pick up on later, in light of what you unpacked, because you are embedded in this image in some way. So take 60 seconds, write a note to yourself, document for a second what the action means for you personally as someone who is embedded in the world of this image, please. All right, so you have that note to pick up on. Let's spend some time unpacking what came up. So I'd like for us to begin with the what we notice piece, because it's always interesting to witness our capacity to just identify what we see without attaching a bunch of meaning to it. And then I'd like us to move into the real life piece, because I want us to think about what this has meant and what it continues to mean for our lived or witnessed experiences. And then I'd like us to think about some of the action that came up. But before we do that, anybody want to chime in about what that experience was like? What was it like to go through that process? Are we needing the mic? Yeah? Okay. I can grab it. Yes.
I would say it was difficult for me because I was so eager to move on to the next step and so eager to put meaning to the picture and not really sitting with what actually was in front of me.
Thank you so much. What happens when we're able to, well, with the invitation to slow that process down, what did that feel like? Like having to stop ourselves from moving forward too quickly.
It gave the opportunity to just name things, to just name what was there. And I found myself even like describing shapes that were there. Yeah.
Right. And expanding probably what you could attach meaning to in the next step because you had time to name it. Are folks familiar with cognitive behavioral therapy? Cognitive behavioral therapy asks us to slow down, right? The quick move between the whatever's happening in our reality, the stimulus, and our emotional response. Because in between there, what happens is we're attaching meaning, and it's the meaning that we attach to reality that really produces the emotional response, not reality itself. But when we slow down that process and we notice what meaning we're attaching to our reality, we develop our power to choose our emotional response, to choose to re-script. And so in cognitive behavioral therapy, there are also labels to name. What am I doing when I have this kind of emotional reaction, when I attach this kind of meaning? Let me name it so that I can think about, is this what I want to do? Is this the script that I want to write for myself? And is the meaning I'm attaching tethered to reality? Or is it something else that I'm distorting, right? And so when we think about the power of that, it's really helpful, that first step. And I hope that invites you to consider how when you engage in this work broadly, you can take a step back and start to name what you're seeing so that we can slow down. And it actually enhances our capacity to attach meaning and transform that. Okay? All right, so let's start. Oh, sorry. You want to say something?
As you were talking about stepping back and slowing down, I was just thinking about the conveyor belt. And on a conveyor belt, you can't step back or slow down. And so
He said we're gonna get into this analysis. All right. So thank you. I appreciate you naming that. Thank you. That's real, right? So thinking about the analysis of what's going on and whatever this is, does not do. Yes. I don't know if I should be carrying this because I think I have another. I tried, but yeah. Yeah.
My big thing was that if we're going to name it, it becomes very difficult because the building, that's all it is, if you're just naming it.
Yeah.
But I saw a school.
Well, you can,
he saw a conveyor belt.
Mm-hmm.
They.
Yeah, I apologize.
I'm sorry. They saw a conveyor belt. That's the trap door there.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing I'm getting at is we've got to be careful with our naming because we get into interpretation very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, we are beings of metaphor, so how can we not?
So the fact that we do have the step of adding meaning means that we're not going to just be like in this abyss of just naming things forever, right? So we're invited to attach meaning to it, but to the degree that we take our time and begin to name and grapple with what's there, it expands our ability to attach meaning later, right? Or attach meaning along the way, because there are things that and a part of doing it collectively is that you may not have seen the trap door, but someone else may have, right? And so we are able to call each other in and to collectively start to put together this picture, and it does something different. That's why I said at the beginning, I do this with multiple stakeholders, because a young person is going to see this image differently than the principal will. And when they're in conversation, it's powerful what happens when they're unpacking this image together, right? So thank you so much. All right, so let's actually get into the naming. What did we notice? What did we see in the first step? No, the first step. Yeah, just describing it. Yeah, we can just talk. Typically I would go from group to group, but we got like 10 minutes. So I really just want us to have a collective conversation. So we can just start naming what came up in the first step in the description. We see a flag. Building. It looks a little bit like a skull, maybe. Yeah, like a face. Okay, now. I felt that. I felt the passion. Okay. All right.
You see the same number falling through as we see getting through the other side.
Okay. I don't know what just happened. Okay. They come out looking more uniform. They go in individual. There's only one direction. It's all going upwards. Do we have someone over here? Do we have any comments from online?
If it's okay with y'all, I'm going to repeat back the comments you say because they can't hear.
Okay.
Or if Dr. J, you could do that.
Yes. I can work on that.
Awesome, thank you. Someone from the chat says the house looks sinister and creepy, like a skull. And that's what we have right now.
Right. Others. It's dark inside the building. Yeah. Yes. The people falling out the bottom of the building don't look as much like people. They don't have as much descriptors as you might see the people on the other side, right? There are no conversations or questions. Everything just seems pretty straightforward, right? We don't know what they're falling into. What's in the bottom there? You can jump in. Yeah. So the building is a black box. We don't know what's going on in there, right? All right, so I'll move us out of this stuff. I know it's hard. But I want us to start talking about real life. I know that you did some work in between. How did you start thinking about how what is coming up in the noticing part of this image actually shows up in our lived or witnessed experiences as it relates to racial healing, racial trauma, race and racism? So an only way to be successful, so this is a message that we get in society, right? It's this lie of meritocracy, right? That the only way to be successful is to move through the schooling system or this kind of conveyor belt configuration. Yeah. What are the real life? So less people come out than go in, right? As was said before.
There's 2 pointers, as many people falling out as there are coming out of the other side.
Right.
And so in terms of my experience, I very closely did not make it out of college. I almost didn't make it out of college. So I was almost one of the ones falling down about
Right. So give me a second. So, because I'm thinking about the fact that when we interpret this picture, we often interpret that side as success and that side as failure. Right? I don't know that that's the case. I'm just gonna put that out there. Yeah, jump in.
The other thing is that I noticed is, in reality, this is repeated over and over again.
So there's a.
Up the laterally and
Mhm.
as you go up the ladder. It repeats.
Yeah.
The same process.
This mechanism, this kind of mechanism, absolutely. When we think about real life and we think about it in terms of the racial healing work that we're talking about for today, I'm curious how you, in real life, it feels to navigate something that looks like this. So people said that we have no idea what's going on inside. Whatever's going on inside is clearly kind of sinister. Folks are either jumping out or being dropped out of the bottom. What does it feel like for students of color to be in a mechanism like this?
I feel when I was going through that conveyor belt, I felt so bound and tight, and it was hard to breathe.
But still not succeeding, whatever
Yes.
succeeding is in air quotations, and also like how our conforming can mean we get the cookies or get the reward,
Yes.
we get to succeed.
Yes. Yes. So we have this. This is perfect. So everything was perfect. Okay. Right. So this is we're talking about what it looks like to conform to get in, right? And to engage maybe in those acts of erasure that we were speaking about before. But because meritocracy is a lie, imagine you conform, you abandon parts of yourself, you erase parts of yourself, and you still hit those barriers that are in place. The trauma of being gaslit. But what does it feel like to be a student of color who is told that school is supposed to do one thing? That if I go into this place and I play the part, something is supposed to happen for me, and it does not. There's another violence that happens there. How does that feel in your body? How does it break trust? Because we want to talk about, young people don't respect authority. We've learned from children to not trust authorities that tell us what's going to happen is going to happen. So I know, is that somebody online? Yes.
I really felt myself in that when I was going to school, like bound, tight, really difficult to get through. And as I moved through, especially when I hit college, like I had to have people circle around me, like teachers and staff who helped me get through, because the story we told is like people fall, like brown queer folks just fall out the bottom. Meanwhile, like there is a lot of dynamic lives that people lived who fell out of the bottom. When I actually relate to people's stories, they are thriving, a lot of them, in their lives, but that's not the story that gets told. That it's who got the diploma and the hat and looks the same as the others on the other side.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. And you said something about feeling bound, right? And that feeling. And so, right, the way that we might confuse what happens in this picture, because of the narrative that we tell about what schooling is supposed to do. Let me throw another wrench in there. So one time, somebody just blew my mind, because I've done this like hundreds of times maybe at this point, all over the country. And somebody looked at the image. I don't know what was going on in their spirit that day, but somebody looked in the image and was like, what if instead of that being 3 students falling out, it's the souls of the 3 on the other side? I said, oh, nah. Let me get out of here, right? I said, oh, nah. Because I was shook. I was shook at thinking about having, we all have been. Again, we live in the world of this design. What is it costing us? So there are multiple ways to look at this, right? That might not be success. That might not be failure. That might be their souls. There's layers to this. Yes. I'll repeat if you can't get. Yeah, you got the mic right behind you.
I saw a couple other people.
It was about the point of people falling out and conforming, where you have billionaires who didn't finish college, right? Because they didn't conform, where you have people who were, valedictorians, salutatorians, who kind of go through this, and then it's just kind of living this mundane everyday life, whereas young and straight, and we bring it back to young Black boys in school, Black and brown boys being stripped of their innovation and their creativity at such a young age. How much do we stifle them?
So I love that example, because let's think about the racialized dimensions of what you just mentioned. When Black boys fall out, I don't know that they necessarily become billionaires.
Well, I would,
right?
And in my head, right, because initially in the group I said, mentioned, the story of, oh my God, the tech guys. But if you look at people who have made it big in the music industry, Jay-Z was a high school dropout, Baby. So when I look at them, it's kind of saying not only like, was that a plan, because those folks are doing something different. So that's the thing when we talk to young people and trying to meet them at that level, because that's the stuff they say to us, and they're well versed in it. And it's like, well, you look, Jay-Z dropped out of high school and he's a billionaire, so why shouldn't I? Type of
Right. And the way that I respond to that is making sure they understand that that's the exception and not the rule. Because the rule of a system like this is to make sure that when Black and brown bodies fall out in there, we know exactly where where they're going, right? And so that illusion or that exceptionalism does not heal the system that for the masses is going to do one thing, right? And so when we think about the racialized dimensions of what you're saying, it is liberating to think about what it means to not be on one straight path and just being like I'm jumping ship, I'm out of here. But depending on what you look like, you jumping into a whole different territory. You might be jumping into a trust fund, or you might be jumping into a whole different path, right? Absolutely. Because the same way there's a school to prison pipeline, there's also a school to Ivy League pipeline, there's also, right? So just thinking about those layers of it, but it's really important for you to name, because we don't know what's under there, but we do understand the racialized dimensions of how it shifts, right? So we're gonna close out with their comment, and then I'm gonna just ask for a few points of action because we're actually out of time. I'm sorry. That was so quick, I know.
For me, when I look at this, also part of what I see is not just students. I see all the Black and brown people that go into education, go into teaching, and go into these nonprofits trying to do justice work, and also if we fail to conform, the ways that we get chewed up and spit out too. So and I feel like I'm going through that right now.
Yeah.
And I've been through it before, and I'll go through it again.
Yeah.
And so I'm just, and it's so, I think, it's Bettina Love talks about spirit murder, right? Mm-hmm. That it's crushing, because it creates hopelessness for me. Looking at this, it feels like you have only two options.
Right. And this can be an image of spirit murder, right? Yeah. Because this right here can very much be read like high functioning depression is a thing. Right? Succeeding in institutions externally, but what's happening at the level of the spirit? What is it costing us to be in those places, right? And so like that's very, very important for us to lift up. And I want us to think about that. And I want us to also, especially because you're saying that you're sitting in that right now. And so we understand that the racial trauma and the healing that is necessary is present with us right now in real and tangible ways that are connected to our bodies, our minds, our spirits. Can we name, before they kick me out of here, at least 2 to 3 points of action that we've lifted up? Yes. You only need 3 minutes? Yeah. Okay. She said, you're not gonna blame me for wrapping it up. Okay, so let's get like 3 points of action. We talk about, because this morning I tried to give you something tangible for pattern transformation, right? So this is real stuff. When you think about what it means to be in these kinds of spaces and to shrink yourself or to feel bound or to live like that for so long, what are the kinds of action that we're committed to when we leave this space in the service of our racial healing?
We say one important thing was creating a safety net.
Creating a safety net. Say more about that. Say more about how that is connected to personal racial healing.
In our experience, most people, we see that because of our color and ethnicity, we go through hard places. In this picture, you can see like a student falling. If we can create a safety net, if we can create support for those people, not to completely fall, but it's like bring them up to fall and bring them back again for the way that they can succeed. It doesn't have to be through this process. It can be like knocking down the building, like we say, and creating a different way, creating a different path, an easy path for they can be successful and be themselves and value who they are.
Thank you. Let's snap it up. Can I push you a little bit? Okay. So I'm asking, because this is what you're naming is very important work, and it's very important to racial healing, right? What I'm asking is, what is the personal racial healing work? See, this is the thing. We're used to building for others, right? So creating that work, creating that safety net is the work that happens outside of us, and necessary work that I believe we're committed to, which is why we're here. But what I want to hear more of is the personal racial healing work. As you think about the way that racial harm is playing out on your mind, body, and spirit, and if it means finding a safety net, right? Finding, like we spoke about the encantos, like really committing yourselves to making sure that you have places of refuge that you can continuously turn to. But what does it look like for us to start with the personal wellness work, even as we think about the broader social justice work that we're committed to? Does that make sense? Yeah. What I'm asking? Yeah, the internet? Yeah, there's someone behind you. Oh, okay.
Hey, Dr. J. My name is Tasha. I use she and they pronouns. I'm coming to you live from Newark, New Jersey. I'm an Uncommon Schools alum. I went to North Star Academy that is here in Newark, New Jersey, and I left North Star 2 years ago because of the racial trauma that I and my students experience. And so we have a very shared experience. And so, in my journey of racial healing from this experience, I've come into understanding more about the Maroons and the importance of creating Maroon space for young people to really be able to self-sustain and really come together with collective power and to really understand where we come from, because that's something that was absolutely missing from our education system. That was being stripped away from us and continues to be stripped away from my students. And so I had to leave that space in order to function and to create a Maroon space for Black and queer and Latinx young people could come to learn their history and to gain critical consciousness. And so that's been a big part of my work. And not just, if I would have had this understanding of who the Maroons were when I was a young person, if I was given that exposure to that alternative history, I don't know where I would be. And so I think it's really important to really instill that in young people. And as far as action, I'm really thinking, so what's the alternative? Like, how do we continue to build alternative sites for education, whether that be new schools, whether that be new teacher training that happens outside of these systems, right? More programming for young people. I really had a fight with Uncommon Schools, and I've been named public enemy #1 because of calling them out publicly. And this has really radicalized me to really come into this understanding. So it is about creating the alternatives for young people, so that they don't fall off the track that they are creating for themselves.
Yes, let's snap it up. So I want to, for folks who are not familiar with the Maroons, this is wild because in the images that I showed earlier in Brazil, in Bahia, Brazil, I spent time with the Quilombola communities. And in Bahia, Brazil, the Quilombola communities during the time of slavery in Brazil were the escaped Africans who created their own communities and defended them. Like, they had their military defense. They were like, you're not coming in here, built their own societies. And 7 of those quilombos still exist in Brazil now and are on the map, right? So these are communities of Black refuge, is similar to exactly what happened with the Maroons. These spaces, again, of refuge. So what it means, the action, and I'm hearing this, what does it mean to have those spaces where we can be fully educated and know who we are and be a part of co-creating and immersing ourselves in those safety nets, in those spaces of refuge, as an act of racial healing, of knowing that, listen, this system is here, but when I turn away from it, if I have to step away from it, what do I turn towards, right? And often it means that we need to turn towards these fugitive spaces like quilombos, like maroon spaces, and others like that. And so just grateful for that. I know we have time for one more comment about action. I'm not gonna be the one to y'all choose. We'll just take the last two since you both have your hands up.
You said personal, so I wrote about forgiving myself for not following the cookie cutter format.
How you gonna take us there in the last 3 minutes? No, I'm listening. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm listening.
No, that was it. Just forgiving myself for not.
Wow.
Because you talked about like what the impact on our thoughts and our minds, our mental, our emotions, and holding that guilt of not going through the way that you've been told all your life that this is the way you're supposed to go.
Yeah.
Can be damaging.
Listen, you out here preaching, right? A lot of us have inherited modes of survival that we have chosen to disrupt as people of color. We've inherited them from our elders who mean well in what they're trying to teach us in order to survive in a white world in the way that they have. Toni Morrison says, freeing yourself is one thing. Claiming ownership of that freedom is another. What does it mean for us to claim ownership of our freed selves? Is something that I end up contending with my elders. I'm just like, listen, I understand that y'all were in a space where being freed was one thing. Now I'm stepping into another iteration of this where I want us to claim ownership of our freed selves, meaning that we're breaking cycles and having to forgive ourselves because the anxiety and guilt of even having to think about what our elders sacrificed, how we're not fitting into the cookie cutter. It's a lot. It's a lot. I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you so much. And then we'll have our final comment here.
Yeah, I appreciate what the brother said. And it makes me think of the great Ruby Sales, who talks about having to forgive our ancestors or our elders for putting us in spaces where people don't love us. So the personal is people who have resources to create those spaces, whether that means you could open up a building on Saturday and do some additional teaching and surrounding our kids with love, the love that they might not be getting necessarily in school or at home, but also if they are getting it at school or home, just provide another space because we need all the love we can get.
Yes. Thank you all so much. So I am going to close out for today, but never closing or limiting the continuous long-term relationship that I hope to continue having with this organization and each and every one of you. But again, my invitation is to dig deep. I would love for you all to take some time when you, again, are in those private spaces that precede the public work, to really think about the impact of the racial harms that we may not name all the time, and how it is that you're going to visualize and actualize and walk out every day your value of what you say you believe people of color are worth. And I'm a person of color. If I'm worth this, then how am I actualizing it in my daily walk? If I've been a victim of spirit murder, how am I healing the spirit in my daily walk? Right? And so I'm going to invite you all to really think about what that looks like in your private spaces, because I promise you that because of Ubuntu, because I am, because you are, that when you do that personal work, it will amplify our capacity to build collectively. Thank you so much.
So I want to invite you in a moment of silence to think about how you would express to Dr. J what she has brought to you, what she has brought to us today. And because the reason I wanted 15 minutes is I wanted 15 minutes for us to express simply, not a long story, what you have brought to me today, what you have brought to us today, and or a prayer that I have for you. A prayer that I have for you, Dr. J. As you are living your calling, as you are living your purpose, not talking about your purpose, you are living your purpose. So I would love to at least have 3 people express that.
As a Black woman who has said so many of the things that you say, and my own workshops have been using some of the same diagrams, and I would like to say thank you for allowing me to be seen. We get to acknowledge and honor our ancestors that are in a different plane, but very rarely do we get to give our living ancestors their flowers. You got them behind you. And I would just say, as a Black woman who came in this space needing something that I didn't know that I needed, you gave that to me. And I just want to say thank you. So many words just affirmed me in what I'm doing and on my path that I'm often alone in. And so I'm going to keep making my maroon spaces so that way folks like me can come in and I don't have to continue to be alone in those spaces.
So 2 more, and I want to see if there's anyone that is online that wants to be the second person. There's some in the chat.
Tia Smith says, I pray Dr. J is able to experience people, places, and spaces of wholeness and restoration year round.
You read that one again, Elizabeth, please.
I would love to. I pray Dr. J is able to experience people, places, and spaces of wholeness and restoration year round.
Year round. Ashe. And one more.
So I came in at lunch, after lunch, and I wish I was in there earlier, but you remind me of, in a way, Kendrick Lamar. You have the spirit, and I pray for you to continue to do this work and that people experience you, but I pray for your safety. Black women are under attack, especially powerful, outspoken women living their truth. I know this because I'm married to one, and I just pray for that you continue to, people get to experience you, but I pray for your safety.
Thank you so much, Dr. J, and thank you everyone who came into the space today. I always leave feeling like there's a few more folks. I would love to hear your story and know what you walked in with and what you're leaving with. But it is a great honor to hold these spaces. Great thanks to Jill. I don't know where she is. Jill, she's downstairs. She arranges all the things. Oh, there she is. Thank you so much, Jill. And thank you to the CEIO team that helps to hold this space all the time. If you would stand up. Stand up. These are the capacity building. Yes. So always remember, if we don't let nothing get in our way, we will make it to a brighter day. But I don't want to miss the sign, so I need your light with mine. All right. All right, see you all. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.